He boiler exploded at 6 in the morning, and Zainab Ademi was standing in 3 inches of scalding water when a stranger kicked down her back door. "Don't touch the valve," he shouted, already crossing the flooded kitchen in muddy sneakers, grabbing her wrist before her fingers closed around the pipe. "You'll take your hand off." "Who are you?" she snapped, yanking free, water soaking through her apron, steam curling around both of them in the gray morning light. "This is my restaurant. Get out." "I'm the guy who's about to save it," he said, already on his knees under the sink, forearms disappearing into the wreckage of pipes. "Give me 2 minutes before you throw me out." She didn't trust him. She didn't trust anyone who showed up uninvited at 6 in the morning speaking perfect Korean with an accent that didn't quite belong to Seoul. But the water was still rising, and her mother's recipe books were 3 feet from the flood, and pride was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. 2 minutes became 20. When the water finally stopped, the stranger sat back on his heels, soaked to the elbows, and looked up at her like he'd just won something. "I'm Hyun-woo," he said. "I work next door." Next door is an empty warehouse. Not for long. She should have asked more questions. She would think about that later, on the nights she couldn't sleep, replaying the moment she let a stranger with 2 clean hands and a too careful voice walk out of her restaurant without demanding his last name. If you've ever had a stranger walk into your life at exactly the wrong or exactly the right moment, you already know where this is going. Stay with me. Zainab had built Amaka's table from nothing. 2 years ago, it was a shuttered noodle shop with a leaking roof. Now it was the only restaurant in the neighborhood where you could get jollof rice with a side of Korean-style braised short rib, where old Korean grandmothers sat next to Nigerian exchange students and nobody blinked. She'd named it after her mother, who died before she ever got to see the sign go up, and every dish on the menu was a conversation between 2 places Zainab had never stopped belonging to at once. She didn't have time for mystery men. She had a restaurant to run, a lunch rush in 4 hours, and a boiler repair bill she couldn't afford. Hyun-woo came back the next day, and the day after that. "You keep showing up," she said, arms crossed, refusing to let him pass the counter. "You keep having things that need fixing," he said, holding up a toolbox like an offering. "Cracked tile today. I noticed it yesterday." "I didn't ask you to notice." "I know," he smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made her forget for 1 full second that she didn't trust him. "I'm going to fix it anyway." She let him. That was the part she couldn't explain to her staff, to her best friend Grace, to anyone. Why she kept letting a stranger with no last name into the one place in the world that was entirely hers. He fixed the tile. He fixed a flickering light. He showed up with a box of rare Korean chili paste one afternoon and said nothing about it, just set it on the counter and left before she could ask where a delivery driver got the money for imported gochugaru that cost more than his supposed daily wage. "You're not actually a delivery driver," she said finally, 3 weeks in, catching him off guard as he crouched by the walk-in freezer checking a hinge that didn't need checking. He went still. "What makes you say that?" "Delivery drivers don't wear shoes that cost more than my monthly rent." She'd noticed. She noticed everything about him now, which frightened her more than any of his secrets. "Who are you, Hyun-woo?" He looked at her for a long moment, something moving behind his eyes that she couldn't name yet. "Someone who's trying very hard to be someone else for a little while," he said. "Can that be enough for now?" It shouldn't have been enough, but she said yes anyway, because his hands were rough from actual work despite his expensive shoes, and because when he looked at her restaurant, he looked at it the way she did, like it was something worth protecting. This is where most people would have walked away. Zainab didn't. If you want to know why that choice nearly destroyed everything, keep watching, because it's about to get a lot more complicated. 6 weeks after the boiler, Grace burst into the kitchen holding her phone like it was on fire. "Zainab, you need to see this." The headline filled the screen. Baek Group heir vanishes days before merger wedding, family offers reward for information. Below it, a photograph. Cleaner hair. A suit instead of a paint-stained shirt, but unmistakably him. "That's not," Zainab started, and then stopped, because it absolutely was. He's been in your kitchen for 6 weeks, Grace said, fixing your sink, while his entire family has private investigators looking for him. Zainab found him that night exactly where she expected, sitting on the back steps of the restaurant, jacket over his shoulders, staring at nothing. "You lied to me," she said, and her voice cracked on the word lied in a way she hated. "I never lied," Hyun-woo said quietly. "I just never told you the truth. There's a difference even if it doesn't feel like one right now." "Say it. Say who you actually are." "Baek Hyun-woo, only son of Baek Group. 3 months ago my father arranged a marriage to secure a merger, and 4 days before the wedding I got in a car and I didn't stop driving until I ran out of road that felt like mine." He looked up at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked genuinely afraid. "I found your restaurant by accident. I stayed on purpose." "Why?" "Because for 6 weeks, nobody has asked anything of me except whether I could fix a sink. Because you looked at me like I was useful instead of valuable. Do you understand the difference? Because I have spent my entire life being a merger and an inheritance and a name on a building, and you're the first person who ever just let me be a man with a wrench." She wanted to stay angry. It would have been so much simpler to stay angry. "You should have told me," she said instead, softer now. "I know. I was afraid that the moment you knew who I really was, you'd only ever see the name. I didn't want to be a name to you. Not here. Not with you. If you're already rooting for them, drop a comment telling me who you're more scared for, Zainab or Hyun-woo. Because what happens next changes everything." The peace lasted 11 days. On the 12th, a black car pulled up outside Amaka's table, and a woman in a charcoal suit walked in like she owned the floor beneath her heels. Because, as it turned out, she nearly did. "Baek Hyun-woo," the woman said, not a question. "Your father would like a word, and Ms. Ademi," she turned, her expression cooling several more degrees. "You should know this entire block was purchased by Baek Group 11 days ago. Every lease, including yours, expires in 60 days. My condolences on your restaurant." The bottom fell out of the kitchen floor. "You knew," Zainab said, turning on Hyun-woo, her hands shaking. "You knew this whole time." I swear to you, I didn't know my father would." He stopped, jaw tight, fury replacing the fear in his face. "This is his move. This is how he pulls me back. He doesn't come for me. He comes for the thing I'd break myself trying to protect. So I'm a pawn now, too." "You're not a pawn. You're the reason I finally have something worth fighting him for." He reached for her hand, and she let him take it, even furious, even terrified, because some part of her had known from the very first flooded morning that this was never going to be simple. "Give me 2 days. Let me fix this the way I fixed your sink from the inside, where it actually broke. And if you can't, then I'll stand in front of the bulldozers myself." 2 days, that's all he asked for. Whether you think that's brave or reckless, I want to hear it in the comments, because Zainab wasn't sure either. Hyun-woo walked back into Baek Group headquarters for the first time in 3 months, past assistants who stared like they'd seen a ghost, into his father's office, where the wedding photos of the bride he'd never married still sat framed on the shelf like an unresolved argument. "You bought her block," Hyun-woo said, no greeting, no apology for 3 months of silence. "You bought 60 leases just to force my hand." "I bought a struggling commercial block at a fair market price," his father said without looking up from his desk. "What you do with that information is your own business, though I notice you came back the moment I touched something you cared about. Interesting what that tells us both." "Release her lease. Amaka's table stays, on its original terms, for as long as she wants it. And in exchange, I come back. I take the vice president role you offered me a year ago. I show up to every board meeting, every shareholder call, every obligation you have for me as myself, on my own terms, not as a groom for a merger I never agreed to." His father finally looked up. "You'd give up running from this life to save one restaurant." "I'm not giving anything up," Hyun-woo said. "I'm finally deciding what I'm fighting for instead of what I'm fighting against. There's a difference. It took a woman with a flooded kitchen to teach me that." The silence stretched long enough that Hyun-woo thought he'd lost. Then his father exhaled, slow and heavy, something almost like respect crossing his face for the first time in years. "Draw up the lease release," his father finally said. "And Hyun-woo, the merger wedding is dead either way. You may as well have chosen something that makes you look this alive." We're almost at the end, but endings are never the whole truth, so let's see what Zainab decides when he walks back through that door. Zainab was closing up alone when the bell over the door rang, and she looked up expecting grace, expecting anyone but him. "It's done," Hyun-woo said, standing in the doorway in the same paint-stained shirt he'd worn the first flooded morning, like he'd deliberately dug it out of whatever closet held his old life. "Your lease is released. The block stays exactly as it is. 60 days gone, you're not going anywhere. And you." "I go back. Vice president, board meetings, all of it, but as myself this time. No more running, no more pretending to be a delivery driver with expensive shoes." He crossed the kitchen, stopping close enough that she had to tilt her head up to look at him. "I'm not asking you to be a name on a building either, Zainab. I'm asking if there's room in this restaurant, in this life you built with your own 2 hands. For someone who only became worth something the day he started fixing your sink instead of signing his father's contracts." She thought about the flooded kitchen, about chili paste left wordlessly on the counter, about every version of him she'd fallen for before she even knew his real name. "You still owe me for the tile," she said, and the smile broke across his face like sunrise. "And the boiler, and the light fixture." "I'll be paying you back for the rest of my life," he said, and when he kissed her, the restaurant around them smelled like jollof rice and imported gochugaru, and every impossible thing 2 people from opposite ends of the world had somehow built together, one repaired pipe at a time. If Zainab and Hyun-woo earned that ending, let me know in the comments, and subscribe, because the next story might just break your heart in a way this one didn't. See you in the next one.